Wow, it's a very interesting story because it wasn't one specific thing. It feels like the universe organized or orchestrated three or four different events in my life from childhood that just brought me to this wonderful place of sustainable fashion. So as a very young child, I grew up watching classic films from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s with my mother because she loved them and we all love them. Uh, and I think from there, I that was like my first sort of introduction, my first foray into fashion through these women like Audrey Hepburn and the women from that era. So that to me, that was what style and fashion actually was. So I grew up with that notion, and when I was a teenager, we moved. We lived in Nigeria and I remember going to an op shop um, and seeing a vintage dress, right, that looked like a dress I had seen in one of the classical films, and I was like blown away. So I ended up going in there and trying it on, but they also had like sort of contemporary trendy clothes mixed with vintage. So, I was just playing dress up, mixing, very old pieces from the 50s with very trendy modern pieces and just creating my own unique style, my own look. And I think that was the moment my eco styling career was born, even though I didn't realize it at the time. Being in Nigeria as well at the time, I all these clothes were clothes that were shipped there, right, from the global north countries.
Mm.
Are either not sold or not sold in the charity shops, the thrift stores, and all, basically things that people don't want. And what I noticed, as much as I loved it, because it gave me the chance to play dress up as a teenager, but it made me realize that a lot of the local fashion businesses were closing down. The tailoring shops were closing down during that time. And the clothes were ending up in mountains of trash. So, because there they don't really do landfills the same way. So there was literally mountains of trash mixed up with household trash. And I remember thinking at that age, this is a problem. This is a big problem, but I didn't know how to address it. So I continued with the secondhand clothing as I grew older, and it's always been a part of my life. And back in 2015, I believe the True Cost documentary came out, the really popular documentary about that. I think it was the biggest documentary so far that sort of exposed this world of the ethics or lack of ethics within the fashion industry and sustainability. So I think it was then that my message about sustainability around fashion became even stronger. Because I've always felt like, yeah, I love clothes, but there has to be purpose behind meaning behind what I do with clothing, not just wearing pretty clothes for the sake of wearing pretty clothes. That's great too, because we love beautiful clothes. But there has to be something behind it that equates to a higher value. So that's kind of how I got into it. So I started, posting stuff online on social media, writing articles, doing research. And that's sort of what landed me in this world, which I absolutely love. Yeah, it's different things because it's kind of a really relatively new industry, right? So it's kind of what presents itself. But primarily, as I mentioned, I write articles for multiple platforms, including mine, Eco Styles, and I teach. So I was teaching short courses at RMIT University here in Melbourne, in Australia, last year and the year before last. And I give talks, I run workshops at councils, businesses, high schools, just pretty much anywhere that's open to the ideas of sustainable and ethical fashion. I'm happy to talk about it and advocate. But I think for me, at the core of it, there's a lot of conversations about ethical and sustainable fashion now, right? But for me, I think to really push the industry forward, I like to look at either key topics that are not being discussed too much, that I know if we pay attention to those topics, will have a bigger impact in making the shift. Things
Mhm.
around, trade agreements, which is it's rare, right? What's the connection between a trade agreement and sustainable fashion? But it's a huge deal, right? International trade agreements and things that have to do with legislation and government as well are quite of essence in making big
Mhm.
changes. Okay, so we're aware that the fashion industry is one of the most polluting, obviously. And I think by now most of us are aware that fashion is accountable for about 10% of climate change, according to United Nations. But one thing that we don't realize is that we have something, if people are familiar with the 9 planetary boundaries. So climate change is only one way in which we're damaging the planet. There are 8 others, such as, ocean acidification, biodiversity loss, for example. And this
Mm.
is a big area for me at the moment, biodiversity loss, because fashion has a big impact on biodiversity loss. So for example, because there's a lot of deforestation in order, to grow, for example, cotton and crops that we use to make our clothes, we're losing a lot of birds, plants, native species plants, insects that are very crucial to the ecosystem. And the ecosystem functioning in a healthy way is very crucial to us, for us to get food. So essentially, we are being our worst enemy by over consuming fashion, because there's so much more than just climate change alone. There's biodiversity loss, as I just mentioned, but then there's also, damage to the oceans, right? And the oceans are literally the biggest carbon sink on the planet. So if we want to solve climate change, for example, we need to address fixing the oceans. And we know that, because of microplastics, that's a big
Hmm.
contributor to damaging the oceans, right? So this is something I feel like in the fashion industry, we can probably, if we put more focus on this, I think we'd get a lot closer to solving a lot of the problems, specifically the environmental problems in fashion. So for apparel companies, I think in the world of sustainable fashion, there's 2 things I think that we need to do, 2 very basic things. One is produce less, manufacture less, and 2, take care of people. That's the people making our clothes and the communities where we manufacture, right? And also the communities where these
Yep.
clothes end. Those are the 2 basic things. But how they can start doing that now is start scaling down manufacture. It's probably not realistic to say, okay, as from tomorrow, we'll stop producing X amount. Maybe starts planning to scale down. There's a system called degrowth, an economic system that talks about this in detail, but maybe start scaling down the plans and justified and safe scaling down. Safe meaning safe for the environment, safe for the workers, their livelihoods, and also safe for the business, right? Because a lot of the big corporations have made more than enough. A lot of the big corporations have multiple billionaires within the company. So I think they'll be fine, if they
Hmm.
produce and instead distribute what they already have fairly amongst workers. So I think that's number one. And also maybe in the future, not just maybe, but definitely in the future, manufacture with natural textiles, obviously. So we want to cut synthetics out of the equation, right? So we should start looking at, some of the new innovative textiles that have been manufactured or being manufactured. Perhaps we can invest in those, right? And that could be what we use in the future, mycelium and so on. And also brands can, if now, this might involve the government, but if brands had a policy, imagine if brands had a policy where they are 100% responsible for all the garments that they produce, right, in terms of repairs. Now, how much better quality would the clothes be that they manufacture in the first place, right? If they
Right.
know that if it breaks down, they are responsible for fixing it for free. Then you won't get all this issues of planned obsolescence. I can't pronounce that word, but that would resolve that straight away. So I think um, that might involve government regulation, or it would be great if brands would do that voluntarily. But I think those are things that the brands can look at. But I think also, there are a lot of hidden things within the supply chain, right? So I think any existing brand or any organization or individuals that are planning to start a brand, I think it's always important to do an ecological 360-degree check on
Hmm.
what impact that everything you do can have, not only in the present, but also 5 years down the line, 10 years, 100 years down the line. What impact is it going to have? And that involves from the source, of that particular garment through to manufacturing, through to distribution, transportation, through to the consumers using it, through to the end of its life cycle, tracing all that and knowing what happens to that garment, right? And make sure that you've covered all the bases. Now, if brands did that, I think we would be in a much better place. And I think there's something this happens already, but we could do more of it around sharing information, having more information sharing, best practice, because there are brands who are doing fantastic, phenomenal jobs already, and it's just a question of modeling what's already working, and having bigger corporations and new fashion companies sort of replicating that. And I think that's how holistically, hopefully, we can move forward. I think if you're working in the fashion industry, you want to make a shift, and not just in fashion, anything in life. I think it starts with doing research, right? Hitting the research, the search bars, and just doing that basic research. But then the sustainable fashion community already has a wealth of knowledge, existing knowledge. There have been people who have been doing these things for 20, even 30 years, that can act as mentors. I mean, forget that. Just even if you think about traditionally, before fast fashion and everything came into the world, we were sustainable before we knew it, so even going back to old methods of doing things. So I think connecting with people who are doing it already is important, asking questions, finding those mentors, and also borrowing from the thing I mentioned earlier about doing sort of a 360 ecology check, with everything you do. It might sound like a great idea. Sometimes you think, oh, right, if I'm recycling, secondhand fabric, it might, but maybe it's not a type of fabric that sheds a lot of microfibers, for example. Some people consider that to not be sustainable. Just because someone told you that it was doesn't mean it is. You have to really, again, do a 360 long-term, short-term check on each thing that you're doing to know that it actually is, so those are the things basically that I would recommend for people who want to transition from the fashion industry, conventional fashion industry, into the sustainable fashion industry.
Yep.
I mean, I'll give you one other example. You're talking about fabrics, but because I'm a stylist, I'll talk a little bit about that. Now, if you're working as a conventional fashion stylist, right, could be with fast fashion, luxurious fashion, whatever, right? You don't really thinking about the ethics or sustainability, and then you want to transition. Something that's really key and important is that you need to bring the aesthetics, the beautiful and luxurious aesthetics that conventional fashion has, into sustainable fashion. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Because the truth be told, we're all in this because we're visual creatures, we're creative. There's something that we connect to it, right? So you have to bring that thing. As much as we all want to sort of protest against all these horrible things that are happening, but we still need to bring that love and beauty and that storytelling into the element of sustainability and ethics, right? So that's incredibly crucial to not forget that, you know. Sometimes, in our zest, in our quest to really design something or create something or style something that's purely ethical, sometimes we forget those, why we're here in the first place, right? What
Right.
drew us here, the love for fashion. So I always say, carry that with you in everything that you do. Ethical and sustainable fashion sadly has a bit of a reputation for being beige, well, used to, it's shifting now, but amongst the uninitiated has a reputation of being sort of bland and earthy colors, which is absolutely not the
Mm.
case. And I, for one, that's one of the things I try to show in, my Instagram, that it can be colorful and fun and different sort of things, right? So I always sort of encourage designers to not stick to that sort of stereotypical aesthetic, and try and venture out. I don't know how easy and realistic that is at this stage, but it does help to encourage new people who are looking at the sustainable fashion world to sort of cross the fence and come and join us over here, because it's really fun. So you can find me on Instagram. My Instagram is eco.styles with an S. You can also find me on my website, which is ecostyles with an s.com.au. Or send me an email, nina@ecostyles.com.au, and hopefully I'll get back to you.